Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? Hope it's great and fantastic. Everything here is wonderful despite receiving a rejection notice. And what I mean by that is, if you haven't been following along, I took games with me to Gen Con last week to pitch to publishers, and I tweeted last weekend that I had left one of those games behind with a publisher. That's a pretty big step, generally, in game design. If you make it past the pitch, making it past the pitch means I went, here's what I got, and the publisher went, tell me more. If you make it past that point, that's a big step. It's a really big step, and it probably means there's something to whatever it is you're working on. It's pretty easy as a publisher, which I've taken dozens of pitches representing a publisher. It's pretty easy to see in the pitch that's like, nah, this isn't for me, this isn't what I'm looking for, move along, right? So making it past that point is pretty good. And I felt pretty strong about the pitch. I felt pretty strong about the game. I still feel pretty strong about the game. But ultimately they decided that it wasn't for them. And so I'll tell you now that the game that I left behind was Northern Saga, the Viking game. And I showed it to a team, and they said, we want to play test this. I left my copy with them to play this week, and they did. And they provided feedback, and they decided it wasn't for them. So the publisher doesn't matter. We don't need to talk about that, because I hope to work with them in the future. And you know, despite, you know, they didn't like this one, they might like the next one, right? They might like this one in the future. This one might evolve into something else that's, you know, way better. But they gave me some notes, and I agree with their notes for the most part. I think that the notes that they gave are very right for them. Like, this is what they want. Maybe they're not quite right for the game, and I have to find a marriage of those two. And I don't mean to like put myself up and say that what I have is better than your feedback. That's not true at all. What I'm trying to say is what they suggested I do to massage the game is not going to help with their core complaint. It's just going to be something else, right? So their core complaint is that the pacing of the game is just off. Like, it's just slow. You don't really know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and so there's just this weird pacing issue. And I agree with that. That has been an issue for a long time. The pacing of the game has always been this kind of, I don't know. I fixed it. I fixed a lot of it. I mean, if they'd have seen the original game, they'd have been like, man, this is a 5-hour game or something. But no, I fixed it a lot. And I'm pretty comfortable with the pacing that exists currently. What I need to find out a way to do is to make the rest of the game worth that time. Meaning that there are people who love to play 6-hour games, but those 6-hour games provide meaning for 6 hours. Whereas this game takes 90 minutes and it feels like a 45-minute game. It feels like it provides the value of a 45-minute game. So it takes twice as long as it should. And so what I need to do now is figure out a way to bring the weight of the game, bring the feel of the game in line with the time, because I don't know that I can cut more time. Cutting more time, probably not going to happen. Bringing the expectation of the value up to the time, that's easier to do. Another point that they gave was that in the beginning there isn't really any understanding of what it is you're supposed to be doing. You have no plan, you have nothing, you just start. And so there's a phrase in writing, in like, you know, books and scripts, and in particular in screenplays, that's called in media res. And the idea is start in the middle of something. You have to start with something happening, right? Like that's how books and TV shows work. And in game design, we talk about if the first 2 turns of the game are just players taking setup actions for the rest of the game, then start the game on turn 3. Like, start the game with those setup actions already in place. Then go. And so that's kind of what they suggested. They suggested starting this game by maybe having a draft. So drafting some of the buildings that you can get and having them already done in front of you, and now let's go. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't necessarily disagree with that those buildings that you already have completed giving you some sort of valuation for the resources that you generate, for what you're headed towards down the line. But it doesn't fix the problem that they perceive of not having direction. And the thing is, you don't have direction. Like, that's not, I'm not trying to say that they perceive this invisible problem. That's not true. The game doesn't have direction. Kind of by design, kind of by choices of my own, but just simply because, unfortunately, it's the type of game where until you've played it through once, you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing, right? There's 3 decks of cards that are invisible to you. You don't know what's in them. You don't know where you're going to score points. You don't know where you're going to be able to find, that one building that's going to change your whole strategy. They're in there. You just have to go find them, right? And so once you've played through the game one time, you'll know, you'll have a general idea of what's in there, and then you can start going for that stuff. And that's just a flaw. Is it a flaw? I guess it is. Like, I'm of a player that if I don't enjoy the first play, chances are I won't try again. So that's kind of the flaw the game has, is if you don't understand what you're supposed to do, then you don't do it, and then the game slows down, right? Having some buildings in front of you doesn't help that problem. So, being rejected isn't an issue. I expected that, right? And I'm not disappointed in it at all. It's fine. I had some ideas going before I showed, I had some ideas for the prototype. One of those being asymmetric player powers. Or not necessarily powers, but maybe asymmetric scoring powers. So that you as the, Jarl of the military, you're going to get bonuses for having military buildings. So that immediately gives you something to target when you go raiding. Like, I want military, mine. And that might help. But ultimately, going straight military is not going to provide you with a whole bunch of mitigation. All the mitigation lies in the other building types. So that's a possibility. I've also considered a more like terraforming Mars or Imperial Settlers approach of all of these buildings are in your hand, and then you play them, so you have at least a future like in your hand. You can say, all right, I want to do this, and then I want to do this, and then you have some way of doing that. That's how the game used to work. You used to be able to have 2 construction zones, and so you had a hand of cards that had a max hand size. And once you built something, you could start building something else. I got rid of the construction zones because now you have people, like you have little warriors, and so the buildings take warriors, which means that if you run out, you run out. You can't have anything else under construction. But I could go back to having the hand of cards. I could go back to you starting with a hand that gives you at least some sort of direction. So you can say, oh, this building looks good to me. I'm going to start with that one. That's a possibility. And it might help. I don't hate it, right? I'm going to have to play test it. But I don't hate it, at least. The problem is, if you have this hand of cards, if I start you with 6 cards in hand, those cards are immediately more valuable to you than spending silver to get a boat, to go raid, to get new random cards, not random, but new cards, and then lose boats, right? So, and that is what, that action, that raiding action is what drives the game. It's what drives the length of the game. The game ends once a certain number of rounds of raids happen. So if players aren't raiding because they're building what's in their hand, the game's not going to ever end, right? It's just going to keep going on forever. That's not true. You eventually will run out of cards. But the point being that I don't know what the answer is. I need to play it some more. I need to play this form quite a few more times. This form I've only played probably a half dozen times. And it needs to have dozens of plays before I really come to a conclusion about what I want to do with it. This is like the, I'm going to guess, 16th version of this game. And I don't think that's exaggeration. It's probably closer to 20. There's been a whole lot of iteration on this design in various ways and shapes and forms, and I'm not quite there yet. I just don't know where it is. But I have lots of ideas to play with. I'm going to play with a worker placement mechanic, which was semi-intended to be in this version, but I didn't do it yet. I'm going to play with asymmetric kind of resource powers that gives everybody the ability to do something, or at least ability to score something, so that you have a scoring goal. And I might play with the hand of cards. We'll see. That one I feel less comfortable with. But, ultimately, all this means is I get to keep working on the game. It's been a chase for all these years, so why not keep chasing it? I think that I think there's something there. I just have to find it. There we go. Now you know the whole story. Ish. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends, wonderful people. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you again on Monday. Today's word you should know to sound smart is hygroscopic. It's an adjective meaning capable of absorbing moisture from the air. Prescription pills are often packed with a container of hygroscopic material to keep the drugs dry. Hygroscopic. Hygroscopic. Yes, the little silica gel is hygroscopic. It sucks the moisture out of the air, keeping whatever it is packed in dry. And like I told you yesterday, brake fluid is extremely hygroscopic, so do not leave an open container of brake fluid lying around, or it will rust your brake lines.